What do a lot of parents do that unknowingly screws their children over? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Not taking the time to explain themselves on certain topics. The whole "do as I say because I said so" or "because I had you" is not effective. Rules should always have valid rationales behind them, ones that you can explain fully. Your room must be clean. Building habits and routines makes life way easier, and keeping a clean house can help reduce the chance of injury from tripping or pests. Bedtime is 8. Sleep is very important for our health. If we don't get enough, we get cranky and don't function as well, yada yada. Adjust for age. And you can build in safe phrases for times when your kids need to listen and follow directions without question. These are used like this. If I ever grab your arm and say apples aren't oranges, you need to do as I say because it is a matter of your own safety. Once we are safe, I will explain. Story 2. Forgetting what it was like to be that age, and expecting their kids to react differently to things than them when they were that age. I remember when I was a kid, I'd always think that I'll never forget how it was to be a kid and I'd do better. But decades later, through many life experiences and a boatload of time, I did forget. I try my best to try and remember what it's like from a kid's perspective, but it's hard. Much harder than I thought it would be when I was a kid. Probably easier for people who had kids in their early 20s. I still think and want to believe I do better than my mom, but that's because I try to treat them with respect and give them agency as much as I can and listen to them. Not just label them as kids. It's also true that some things you only realize the importance of later in life. Story 3. Not teach them to think for themselves. This isn't just parents, it's systemic. Our entire approach to formal education doesn't teach independent thinking. Everything is rote. Independent thought requires questioning authority. And it's not in the state's best interest to teach the people to question authority. There are educational systems, Montessori, Ferrer, etc., that do teach properly, but they're not very mainstream at all. One of the best things my parents did for me as a young kid and early teen was tell me to figure it out when I came to them with a task my 8-year-old brain couldn't figure out. They'd pitch in general ideas of how to fix it without giving me a surefire way to fix it. It really helped to improve my creative problem solving to the point that I was even making little contraptions to help with my chores. To this day, it's still one of my biggest strengths and has helped me a lot as I continue to study engineering. Story 4. They fail at letting their kids fail and figure out how to recover. It prevents the kids from becoming resilient. Had a student, he was on an IEP, whose parent would call a meeting with the admin, his case manager, and his teachers if the DARE marked him below a B. The student was fine with getting a C, but nope, his parents were. Convinced he was going to get into a college and get a degree in computer engineering or something. The thing is, the kid thought that 90% of the assignments were beneath him and refused to do them. Parents got the kid on the most lenient grading scale I have ever seen. They didn't want to pass or fail. No, they still wanted letter grades so he can have a good GPA. Like, only doing half the coursework would give him a high B lenient grading. His parents bulldozed the line between advocating and enabling. Story 5. Not apologize when they're wrong. I've never heard my mom apologize to me ever. She said many hurtful things to me in the past that I've never let go of because she never came to apologize for any of the things she said. If she had simply apologized and admitted that what she said was wrong and hurtful, I think that things between us would be so much better. Keep working those boundaries. Keep doing what is right for yourself. If you stick to your beliefs and do the work to heal and be who you want to be, there is nothing that can stop you from having the life you want and deserve. Story 6. Over-sheltering them. You can't protect your kids 24/7 for their whole lives. It leads to naive adults that get taken advantage of. People need freedom to explore what is unknown to them. When we are born, everything is unknown to us. It is only natural to explore and learn, whether or not we succeed or fail. This means a person needs to be allowed to make mistakes that have some cost associated with them, but also learn to explore carefully so that the cost is not too much for them to bear. And they also need to learn to pay the cost of their mistakes themselves responsibility. Overprotecting a child leads to a person that is unable to be comfortable exploring and developing their own situation in life and fend for themselves responsibly. A person stuck in arrested development. Unless, of course, if they learn it in adulthood, but that's way riskier than learning it in the safer space of childhood. Story 7. Forgetting that a kid's brain isn't fully developed like their own. Also, shaming in any way of something your kid is into. Trying to learn about it is actually quite helpful and a good way to connect. And parents can learn things that they like too. I didn't know I liked Pierce the Veil until my 12-year-old liked them, and I wanted to check them out. Also, shaming your kids' interests is a great way to ensure they won't come to you with problems. If you want your kid to be open, you can't punish openness, even if it is awkward or weird to you. Story 8. Comparing them with other kids. My mother compared me unfavorably to every single sibling, cousin, and classmate she could think of. It was impossible because I had to live up to the best trait of everyone else. Nothing I did, and I mean nothing, was ever praiseworthy. One day, when I was in a drive-thru with her and some of my family's youngest, I felt safe enough to ask her to stop. She said she didn't know what I was talking about, that she never compared her kids to each other. A few minutes later, in the same drive-thru, she did it again. Thinking she was legitimately confused, I immediately pointed it out. She then denied she'd said it. It hurt my brain. Turns out my mistake was thinking she cared about truth or logic. Story 9. Not discussing money with them. I'm not saying parents should dump their financial stress on their kids, but things like budgeting, taxes, and personal finance discussions would have helped me tremendously. All I knew about money growing up was that it was a constant source of stress and tension. My parents have been in crippling debt my whole life. I taught myself to be responsible in spite of my parents. I'm in a much better financial position than they have ever been. I'm no financial whiz or anything, but I am in a good spot. My only debt is a mortgage with a great interest rate. I own my 2022 vehicle outright. My credit card gets paid off every month, and my credit score is in the 800 feet. I've just opened a recipe for my kiddo. He's 3 months old now. When he's old enough, he won't have to play catch-up. He can start off a little ahead of the game. Each generation is going to be a little better off than the last. That feels good. Story 10. Not encouraging them to learn basic skills like cooking for fear it'll make a mess. Not encouraging them to learn how to adapt and problem solve on their own. I feel like I see it a lot with people whose parents instilled in them a sense that there was one single correct way of doing things. Then they have to interact with situations where the one and only correct answer doesn't work, or people who have different ways of doing things. And suddenly they either have to relearn their whole way of approaching the world, or crack under the pressure. Story 11. Might sound a little contradictory, but either not disciplining them or disciplining them way too much. This topic goes pretty deep, but what it boils down to is motivation. Do you want your kid to be motivated to behave by fear? Or by an intrinsic desire to do what's right? The first option is way easier, but then that turns them into angry adults who don't know how to react when real consequences happen to them as adults. Instead, if you start at the earliest age building intrinsic motivation, then when they are making their own decisions, and there is no one there to force them to comply, they actually want to do the right thing. It's a lot harder to do because it requires you to focus on their emotional reaction to doing something wrong instead of the actual outcome of the bad thing, at least initially. But think about it. When a kid does something wrong and there is a big reaction on both sides and eventually everyone calms down and thinks about it, the kid gets what they did was wrong and why. If you focus your energy on building their emotional resiliency, then getting to that calm down phase should happen much more quickly. And again, when they are adults, they are better equipped to do this themselves when no one is there to be mad at them about what they've done. Story 12. Try to fill every minute with organized activities such as traveling sports leagues. Don't get me wrong, some extracurricular activities are good. But when your kids never have an unaccounted for minute, I think it has a negative impact. We were overburdened with so many activities as kids, and as a consequence, I have siblings who are very good at singing, dancing, piano, and acrobatics, but didn't get good grades and are now struggling to find a stable career that can actually put food on the table. One also rebelled hard as an adolescent and totally plummeted in life to suddenly start partying, etc. I quit most of these extracurricular activities at age 16 or so and was almost disowned for it. However, I had more time for my studies and also just for myself. It's great to enrich your kids with extracurricular activities, but never lose sight of what you actually want them to achieve with their limited capacities. Do you want burned-out, lonely circus performers, or do you want happy kids who achieved good grades, have healthy social lives, and who have good career prospects? I may not be able to do a backflip, but at least I have a respectable education, some great people in my life, and a competitive skill set in statistics and computing. Story 13. Not letting them learn how to mourn. On a grander scale, there's this idea of not letting your children suffer. We all know it's important to let them struggle a little to learn how to cope. But one no one ever talks about is allowing your child to mourn a loss. If a beloved toy breaks, go buy a replacement ASAP. If a pet fish dies, go buy a replacement ASAP. You're teaching the kid to just replace things they've lost instead of processing the loss. So what happens when they lose something that can't be replaced? They don't know what to do or how to handle it. Like, let your kid cry over their dead fish for a few days and bury it in the garden with some flowers before asking if they'd like another. People think it's small, oh, it's just a toy. But losing a beloved toy is likely the closest thing a kid has to losing a person or a pet they've had for years, like a dog. Let them learn to mourn their lost teddy bear so they'll build those processes, and when older, can mourn the family dog, etc. I think it's just as bad when they tell them that it's just a toy and to stop crying. Invalidating negative feelings like being upset, angry, and telling the child to stop because they just don't want to deal with it just results in adults who have no idea how to regulate their emotions. They're either super emotionally repressed and just lose control by lashing out at anything and anyone, resulting in an extremely abusive adult, or an adult who just disassociates with everything. Story 14. Never telling them no. This one is huge. I've been a teacher for 20 years and I've seen the consequences of this over and over. I'd watch a friend parent their kids this way and think, that's going to cause problems, only to see those problems firsthand 10 years later in school. Some of the kids I've seen raised this way are becoming young adults, and they generally can't handle life at all. They are entitled, inept, disorganized. But worst of all, they have no sense of boundaries, not in friendships, school, or work settings. As a general statement to anyone reading, please do not do this to your kids. Set boundaries, have reasonable expectations, and stick to them. Story 15. Telling your kids they are so smart constantly when they are excelling in primary school, but then expecting the exact same grades and chastising them for being lazy once they hit middle school and the work actually becomes difficult. You're not pushing them to do better. All you've done is instill this idea that they've peaked early and that they are a failure and a disappointment for not being a genius. Because everything used to be so easy and suddenly it's hard and everyone is mad at them. Ask me how I know. Parents, reward honesty, hard work, and a good attitude. Don't attach your kids' worth to their grades and test scores. Also, the difficulty jump for things like math is absurd between primary and secondary school, so expect some struggle. Not to mention puberty is happening at that time and absolute f***ing with the kids' emotions. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below.